Good afternoon. My name is Ollie Moore and I'm a partner at ERM. I'm excited to welcome you to this week's instalment, the 8th instalment of At Home with ERM and KJA webinar series. This webinar series is curated to bring together a set of topics that we hope will spark thought, insight and learning to support you and your organisation to innovate during this period. We've lined up 3 more webinars in the current series running through to September, and today we bring you product stewardship, helping your client keep safe during COVID. This is presented by Dr. Lynn Denison, the Technical Director in our Melbourne office, and Griffin DaCosta, a Senior Consultant, also based in our Melbourne office. We'll hand over to Lynn and Griffin shortly, but before we do, our facilitator for today, Raquel Boyd, will take us through the use of the GoToWebinar platform.
Thanks very much, Ollie. So thank you all for joining us today. As you can see, we are working inside of the GoToWebinar platform, and what that should have in front of you in your desktop is not only our PowerPoint slides, but also a small control panel that will allow you to interact with us throughout the webinar. So just to let you know what some of these icons mean, firstly, the microphone, red with a cross through it, is the microphone muted. So everybody is automatically muted on the webinar. You will have an opportunity toward the end of the session for some Q&A. And we really invite you to ask questions and participate at that time. Now, you can do that by raising your hand, by clicking on the hand icon. And then when we get to that part of the session, I'll be able to unmute your line so that you can ask your question of Lynn and Griffin today. During the session, at any time though, you are able to enter questions into the typed question area. And you can access that through the icon that has a question mark on it. If you click on that, you'll be able to type in your questions, and then what we will do is we can possibly answer that throughout the session, or indeed read that out at the end and answer that in the Q&A session as well. So please do feel free to interact with us throughout the session, and we'll come back to this when we get to the Q&A. I will also remind you that this webinar is being recorded. So I will now hand over to Lynn to take us through today's topic.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. Since March of this year, when COVID really sort of hit our shores, we've had a large number of inquiries regarding the importation of hand sanitisers and disinfectants for use against COVID. So they're quite specific around their use for COVID. This is a rapidly changing space in Australia as the regulators are attempting to streamline approvals while ensuring the safety and efficacy of the efficiency of the products on our market. Not all imported products or products that are bought online are compliant with our Australian regulations. So the question is, what does our product stewardship team do in the regulation space in terms of hand sanitisers and disinfectants? How do you know if they're safe and effective, and what to look out for? So our product stewardship team deals with a whole range of issues. The diagram on your right of screen shows the range of products that we look at, from manufacturing of products, end of life, raw materials processing. We deal with life cycle assessments, regulatory compliance, supply chain risks and assessments, dangerous goods classifications, substance registrations, safe chemical assessments, and auditing. So in terms of our disinfectants and hand sanitisers, the main thing we do for our clients is that we check the regulatory compliance. So would they meet the requirements in Australia? Can they be sold on the Australian market, or are they do they need to be registered for use in Australia? Where it's necessary, we actually prepare those dossiers and submit them to the regulatory agency for approval, make sure that all of the testing and everything that's required is included in that. We provide advice on what the testing is required to support the applications, and then we provide the scientific support for any exposure and risk assessments. So who regulates chemicals in Australia? We haven't included the Food Authority in here. These are the main regulatory bodies that register chemicals. So the Australian Industrial Chemicals Introduction Scheme, ACES, replaced NICNAS on the 1st of July. So they're responsible for the registration of industrial chemicals, regulation of industrial chemicals, and maintains the inventory of industrial chemicals in Australia. So all chemicals, industrial chemicals that are imported or manufactured in Australia must be listed on the inventory unless they're exempt under the provisions of the Industrial Chemicals Act. There's been a whole lot of changes around that, which we won't go into today, but we will go back. The TGA regulates the hand sanitisers, therapeutic goods, medicines and poisons. They regulate both the active substances and that's a substance that kills the germs, for want of a better way of putting it, and also the product. They both have to be assessed. The assessment and registration can take up to 2 years to complete, but as I said, they're trying to streamline that for the products against COVID. The APVMA, not particularly relevant to disinfectants and hand sanitisers, but they look at the veterinary medicines and agricultural products. So the regulatory framework around the disinfectants and hand sanitisers has changed considerably in the last 12 to 18 months. It used to be that every hand sanitizer and disinfectant had to be registered with the TGA, which was, as I said, a very long and drawn out process. There's now options, and some of them have exemptions, some of them just get listed, and some are not regulated at all. So for example, hand sanitizers that fall under a cosmetics brand would be considered as not regulated by the TGA. Not all hand sanitizers, and this is really important, and disinfectants are effective against COVID. They have to have been tested against the particular strains of the virus to be tested, and not all of them are. So the TGA have since March, I think it's been March, provided a listing of disinfectants that they've assessed, including all of the testing against the particular strains of the virus for effectiveness against COVID. So if you are interested in knowing exactly what's going to be effective against COVID, I'd recommend going onto the TGA website, go under the COVID approved disinfectants, and it gives you a list. There's only 35 that have been approved. Now we've put Glen 20 up there because if you've been watching the television recently, you'll see the advertisement that it is now shown to be effective and approved against the COVID-19 virus. Just a couple of things to watch out for. It is only the hospital grade Glen 20 that is approved, and there are 2 on the market. So you can see on the slide that is up there at the present that the words hospital grade are down at the bottom, and also just above that red line there that says hospital grade there. So that one would be effective against COVID. The other one that doesn't have the hospital grade logo on it isn't effective against COVID. So just be aware of that when you're buying things, because in the supermarket and in the advertising, it's not always clear. So we're going to move on to our hand sanitizers. And to start this one off, we're going to run a bit of a poll. Just to say, how do you choose your hand sanitizer? Do you do it on the basis it's a recognized brand, the price, it's on sale, or it's expensive? If it's expensive, it must be good. What's in it? Smells nice, effective for many hours. So Raquel, I think you're going to run the poll.
I will. Thanks so much, Lynn. So the question is as posed. I am going to open the poll up now and launch that for you. So it is interactive. You'll be able to see that on your screen in just a moment. And you should be able to click on the response that best represents your buying decision with hand sanitizers. So just to recap, we have the options of recognised brand, price, whether it be on sale or because it's expensive, what's in it, whether it contains additional things like moisturisers or scents, and its claimed length of effectiveness. All right, I'll give you another probably 10 seconds or so just to think about that, and then pop in your responses. We have most people have put their answer in. Just giving it a moment, and then I'll show you all the responses and we can have a look at that. Okay, I'm going to close that now, and I'll share that so that you can see that coming up on your screens. So what we can see there is that 60% of you responded that you choose based on a recognised brand, 20% on price, and 20% on what's in it, what the ingredients are. So a split of 60, 20, 20, and no one claiming that they're choosing it based on moisturiser, scent, or claimed effective hours. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lynn?
Yeah, I think it's good to see that that's that's the breakdown. I was looking at hand sanitizers in Maya the other day, and there was one that says it was effective for 24 hours, no matter how often you washed your hands. The same morning on the web, there was you could buy 5 litres of this stuff that was alcohol free and, you know, was effective for 24 hours. But, you know, is that really true? You know, there were some that were advertised because they smell so nice and people were buying them because, you know, the smell is amazing. But again, how effective is that? So it's good to see that people are buying on the basis of recognised brand. The question then is that really effective, and is that what is required? So hand sanitizers, what should be in a hand sanitizer? So by definition, a hand sanitizer can be used with water or without water. One thing to remember, if you do have dirty hands, if you've been in the garden or wherever you've been and your hands are dirty, you need to get the dirt off before you put the hand sanitizer on, because it won't work. So whether you just rinse it with water or whatever, it won't work. If you put it on over the dirt, it won't remove the dirt. So the regulation, it is regulated. They are regulated if they make the claim that they're effective against specific germs. So even things like E. coli and those sorts of things, if it's a hand sanitizer, it has to be registered with the TGA. But there are some exclusions. So if they meet the WHO formulations, they can be exempt from that, but there are really specific specifications around that. So the ethanol, they have to contain at least 80% ethanol or 75% isopropyl alcohol, and they can't contain methanol. That's worldwide, because ethanol is really quite toxic. So if you see anything that's got ethanol on it, methanol on it, don't use it. So these are the ones that you can buy online. So you can buy anywhere that don't have to be regulated. So these are the things to look for. So they've got to have greater than 80% ethanol, as I said, or isopropyl alcohol. They've got to have a little bit of hydrogen peroxide in them and a little bit of glycerol in them. They cannot contain fragrances. They cannot contain moisturizer or colors or anything else, because that all reduces the efficiency of how they work. If it has been brought in under the WHO, the labeling should say it's based on the hand rub formulation of the WHO. And if it has been approved by the TGA, it will have an OSTAR label number on it, which says that that will be the registration number that has been given to it by the TGA. So that tells you that it's been approved for its use. A couple of things not to do, and if you look at the photograph on the side, can we just go back to those photographs on the side, on the previous slide? Make sure they don't look like drink bottles or the little food preparations that you your kids drink, because kids are drinking it. And so make sure it's not represented as a food or a beverage. If you look at these hand sanitizers in the photograph on the side, the Cleanwell one, these are all for sale, is alcohol free. So if you were looking at buying that one, then it's not going to be effective against COVID at all. The Aesop one smells beautiful, but it's full of fragrances and moisturizers and all of those sorts of things. It may be effective against other types of germs. It's not going to be effective for COVID. It wouldn't be accepted by the TGA and would be considered as a cosmetic. So anything that falls into a cosmetic label is not shown to be effective against COVID. So what else do we avoid? Well, there are a lot of safety considerations around this too. And one of those is this stuff is highly flammable. It has a high alcohol content and you need to keep it away from flames. This photograph at the front, at the top there, is someone who used the hand sanitizer. They were close to a flame. It could be on your gas stove. It could be an open fire. It could be a barbecue. It caught fire and burnt their hand. And if you go on the web and look at hand sanitizer burns, there are some really horrible photos there, and a lot with little kids as well. So just be very aware that the hand sanitizers are very flammable. You don't have to have your hands on it. The vapors can go, the vapors can catch and will come back and catch fire. Kids are drinking this stuff. In the US, there are 700,000 children this year that have ingested hand sanitizer. Most of the kids who under the age of 6 did it by mistake, but there are some kids ages 6 to 12 that drank it to get drunk. All of them got ill, some of them got hospitalized. And it's not just a US thing. I looked on to see what happened in Australia. If you look on the health department websites, there's a whole lot of warnings about keeping it away from kids and what's happening. A 5-year-old child in WA last week got hospitalized from licking their hands after they put it on their hands, and they licked their hands. So just be aware that this stuff, it's going to be part of our life for a very long time, and we will need to keep using it, but we do need to be aware of the safety issues. And call the Poison Centre if you think your child has consumed hand sanitizer. The other thing to keep in your mind too is that the safety of homemade sanitizers cannot be regulated. So, there's a whole lot of things on the web, DIY hand sanitizers. There's no way to know if they're effective. There's no way to know if they're safe. So stick with what your poll said, buy recognized brands to make sure that they're safe. Imported products, they're not regulated. Anything bought over the net is not regulated in Australia. So it may not be safe, it may not be effective, it may not. So again, buy local brands that you know. Check the TGA website. And above all of it, remember, best way to keep your hands COVID-free, wash them in soap and water. The hand sanitizer is simply a backup. So there's a lot of things to consider when buying a hand sanitizer. We're helping make sure that our clients and the clients from overseas are bringing ones in that are effective and meet the Australian regulatory requirements, and we will continue to do that. But we're over to disinfectants, and what do we do in that space?
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn. Griffin, do we have you online?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Raquel. Hi, everyone. My name is Griffin DeCosta. I'm a senior consultant at ERM. I'm a toxicologist by training, and I have 20 years experience in product stewardship and regulatory affairs. So that's enough for me. Let's go to talking about disinfectants. It's now recognised that a combination of cleaning and disinfection are the most effective means of removing COVID-19 from surfaces. Cleaning and disinfection are things we often don't think much about, let alone realise that cleaning and disinfection are actually two distinct processes. In this part of the presentation, we'll look at one important part of this practice of removing COVID-19, and that is disinfectants and how they're used. Sorry, I've just lost my screen. How they are being regulated in this time of COVID-19. Okay, to get us thinking more about disinfectants, it's time for another poll. And I'll pass you back to Raquel, who will work us through the poll.
Thanks very much, Griffin. So yeah, it's time for us to hear from you. So what we'd like to do is ask you the question on the screen in front of you. How do you think disinfectants can be used? So a very topical question at the moment. So here are our options. On inanimate objects only, liberally on hands and faces, to wash foodstuffs, for internal human use to treat an infection, or E, all of the above. So I'm just going to release the poll to you now. It should be coming up on the screens any moment. There it is. So you're able to enter your answers there. So please go ahead. You've got the opportunity to put in where you think you stand on the use of disinfectants. So most of you have put your hands up here to give us your answers. I'll give you about another 5 seconds and I should have all of you at that point. Fantastic. So I'm going to close that for entry and then I will share it so that everyone on the screen can see the results. And so what we can see there, Griffin, is we have 88% of our attendees have said on inanimate objects only. And we've got 13% suggesting for internal human use to treat an infection. Do you have any thoughts on those results, Griffin?
Well, I'm talking to some really informed people. It's excellent. So I would have expected a more broad spread of answers, but no, we're definitely got an informed audience.
How about the response for internal human use?
Yes, that's interesting, and I guess we'll deal with that and how the TGA views what disinfectants are in the next slide. So shall we go back to the presentation?
We will indeed. Let me just bring that presentation back. There you go. And over to you to continue, Griffin. Thanks.
Thanks, Raquel. Okay, so we're back to the presentation. Okay. The first thing to recognise is that disinfectants are designed to kill. The TGA defines a disinfectant as something that is applied to inanimate objects to kill microorganisms, and despite certain recent suggestions to the contrary, they are not intended for internal use or use on skin. In Australia, disinfectants are regulated based on their intended purpose, which is discerned by the claims made in the instructions for use, labelling, and promotional material. Disinfectants fall into one of three categories: exempted, listed, or disinfectants that are considered excluded goods. Next, we'll look at listed disinfectants, which is the category COVID-19 disinfectants will fall into. A listed disinfectant is a hospital, household, or commercial grade disinfectant that makes a specific claim. That is, it claims to kill viruses, fungi, spores, or tuberculosis bacterium. It is used on inanimate objects and is not for internal use or use on skin. It must be listed on the ARTG prior to supply. Listed disinfectants can be identified by a unique OSTEL number that appears on the label. And we can see that OSL number on the label that we've got on the side of the screen. Listed disinfectants must meet all requirements given in the Act, regulations, instructions, orders, and codes for disinfectants. They must have supporting efficacy and toxicity data. There are labeling and packaging requirements and post-market responsibilities as well. Disinfectants used on medical devices are considered medical devices and are regulated as such. I won't go into much detail about the medical devices, but if you have any questions, you can always contact me for further information. So the question is, how do we know disinfectants live up to their claims? And are they safe for use? Well, distributors or manufacturers need to have data to substantiate all claims and show safety. All ingredients must have an AAN. These names are maintained by the TGA. These must be used on the ARTG listing, labels, and product information documents. If one or more ingredients don't have an approved name, suppliers and manufacturers must make an application to the TGA and nominate a name. Full formulation details of the disinfectant, such as actives, and active is the substance that actually kills the microorganism, fragrances and colorants, and information on its manufacture, quality control must be available and provided if requested. Microbial efficacy studies to substantiate any claims must be available. Further details on acceptable test methods, test organisms and viruses, acceptable surrogates are given in various TGA orders and instructions. And if you need further information on those orders and instructions, again, you can contact me. I'm happy to provide those links. Stability data that shows that the disinfectant's physicochemical properties and efficacy are maintained for the proposed shelf life of the disinfectant should be available also. Toxicity data that shows that it's safe for use and safe following accidental exposure are required. Data needs to cover acute oral and inhalation toxicity, eye and skin irritation, and skin sensitization. Generally, new tox studies conducted to international guidelines are not necessary for all new products. They're only necessary for new actives. And again, those are the substances that actually kill the microorganisms. The TGA will also accept data from the literature for toxicity data as well. There are post-market obligations, including adverse reaction reporting to ensure ongoing safety. Disinfectants must be packaged in impervious and sufficiently strong material, which must have excess capacity to accommodate for product swelling. If there are packaging requirements that are required under the poison standards, these too must be met. Labels must only use approved names, include quantities of actives and other ingredients. They must include a batch number, expiry date, and the OSTEL number. Use of instructions and a couple of mandatory statements are also required. If the disinfectant is used in the workplace, appropriate labeling that complies with the relevant regulations, and that's workplace labeling regulations, is also required. Next, we'll have a look at what's happening in this space and matters for us to consider when we're dealing with COVID-19 disinfectants. It's really important to note that when it comes to COVID-19, some overseas regulators, such as the US EPA, are accepting claims against COVID-19 based on surrogates that they normally wouldn't accept. For example, microbial efficacy studies carried out in feline calicivirus will be accepted by the US EPA, as the virus is considered by the US EPA more difficult to kill than COVID-19. However, in Australia, the TGA are not accepting feline calicivirus as a surrogate for COVID-19. And the only surrogates accepted by the TGA are human and animal coronaviruses. So one cannot assume that because it has been accepted by the US CPA or any other agency as for use against COVID-19, that it'll necessarily be automatically accepted by the TGA. If buying products online from overseas, it's important to recognise that these products may not meet the high standards set by the TGA and may not deliver on their claims. The TGA has indicated that they will do their best to prioritise COVID-19 applications and inquiries, and we've seen this. Certainly, there has been an increase in the number of COVID-19 listed disinfectants in the last few months. But it's also important to note that the TGA is actively issuing fines and fines for breaches of the Act and regulations in relation to COVID-19. And as a sidebar, it's also important to note the TGA has no issues with publicly naming and shaming companies and individuals who breach the Act. So what does that mean in terms of product stewardship? It means that product stewardship and regulatory affairs compliance really needs to be a very early consideration when considering supplying COVID-19 disinfectants to Australia. I usually say that it should be in your top 5 list of considerations when putting together a business case for introducing a new product. Okay, so now we'll go to a final thought on hand sanitizers and disinfectants. When all's said and done, and regardless of the hand sanitizers and disinfectants that are available, soap and water or washing surfaces with detergent is still the best way to protect ourselves from COVID-19. So that's the last thought on COVID-19 disinfectants and wraps up our presentation. And I'll pass it back to Raquel to moderate the questions and answer section of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Griffin. And thank you to Lynn also for that really interesting presentation. I certainly find it incredible when we think about everyday consumer products, which particularly through the COVID-19 pandemic are now really front of mind. And thinking about actually what has to go through, you know, what we have to go through as organizations to get those products to market, and the kind of regulations around them that actually do indeed keep us as consumers and users of these products safe. So thank you so much for the insights into that. I'm sure there's a lot more technicalities that you can go through into this, but really appreciate how you've explained and talked through those really crucial elements that are really top of mind for pretty much everyone globally at the moment. So indeed, now is your opportunity to ask questions of both Lynn and Griffin. The way that you can do that is, as I'll show you on the screen with the control panel, you can raise your hand to ask a question, or you could type a question into the questions box. Either way is fine. We can read it out if you've typed it, or you can raise your hand. So just have a think for a moment. And if you do have a question, please raise your hand so that we can make sure we can come to that in the few minutes that we have available to us on the session. So as we're waiting for some questions to come in, I actually have one, and I'm not sure whether it's best for Lynn or for Griffin. But you made a mention, I think, Griffin, around shelf life. And I think about, you know, what's in my handbag and what's in my son's school bag. And I think about those lovely little, you know, travel-sized packs of hand sanitizer that, you know, I probably packed in my son's school bag, maybe 2 years ago. And he probably hasn't used all that much of it, but I still keep it there and it makes me feel good because it's there. But from a shelf life perspective, are there limits for these kind of products that we should be aware of?
Yes, there
of
are.
hand san- I
Sorry,
was
Lynn,
just going
go
to say,
for
with
it.
hand sanitizers, you should have an expiry date on them. They will have an expiry date stamped on the label, but yes, they do. They do have a
They do,
shelf life. Yeah,
and we should listen to it. It's not just a suggestion.
it will lose its efficiency past its shelf life. Griffin, do you want to add
Great.
something to that?
No, yeah, I think you've covered it. Yes, so it's usually about a year. Yes, but a use by date will definitely be on the label.
Great. Okay, well, that's my next task this evening, to go through the school bag. Thank you. Now, I do have a question here that's come through on the questions box, and I'll just read that out for you. And this one perhaps is for yourself, Griffin. How do we disinfect our groceries and vegetables that we buy at the market?
It's a really good question, and I'm going to use a comment that a professor in infectious disease recommended, and that is to actually wash them with in water, and you can also wash them in soapy water, and that's what's been recommended at the moment.
So we're being recommended to use soapy water, just like a normal,
Yep.
The kind of soap we use on our hands, but to use that on the food?
I believe that the usual detergent that you're washing, liquid detergent. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, and rinse them thoroughly, I would say, afterwards as well. So that's the recommendation that's been put.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you, Griffin. And indeed, yes, thorough rinsing afterwards, just to make sure, if nothing else, that taste of dishwashing liquid has gone off the zucchini, before cooking that one. But it's a great question, and I certainly myself, like the person posing this question, have wondered about that. When you go even just to the standard supermarket, there still is loose vegetables that people can handpick and touch and put back. And so that is certainly a concern for most people at this current time.
Can I just add something to that? If you are
Oh,
going
yes,
to wash
please,
them, if you are going to wash them in your dishwashing detergent, make sure that you wash them really well in water after that, because your dishwashing detergent has chemicals in it that you may not want to ingest. So the washing, as Griffin said, after you've washed it in the dishwashing detergent is really important, not just for the taste, but also to make sure you don't ingest something that's not good for you.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Okay, we have time for one more question. Do we have anyone who'd like to raise their hand and ask a question? Okay, if not, I do have one more that's coming through the typed box. And the question is actually in relation to the TGA. So as you mentioned throughout the session, the TGA is quite prominent in the process for regulation. So they must be really busy at the moment. Are they doing anything differently? Have they changed any processes to respond to the COVID pandemic?
Yes, they have. They're constantly making changes to their exclusions determinations that are getting published online. So basically what that's saying is that there are now some exclusions under the Act, like with the hand sanitizers, that if they meet those requirements, they don't have to go through a separate approvals process. The listing process to get the disinfectants listed to be effective against COVID, which is what most of our international clients want. They want to be able to sell it as effective against COVID. They're very, very specific about what testing they need, and that they're streamlined for products that are already listed that want to show that they're effective against COVID. The process is a lot quicker, but if it's a brand new product into Australia, it still has to go through it, but there are quicker processes for it to go through. So they're constantly changing it. As I said earlier, the regulatory space around this is changing every month, just to try and get more products on the market, and also to make sure that the products that are getting out there are effective and that people aren't getting caught up on the advertising. I was saying to Raquel before, I was looking on the internet this morning and you can find, there were 3 products up there where you could buy bulk hand sanitizer for 5 litres at a time. And there are about $20 difference between the different brands. One said made by a TGA approved lab and it met all of the requirements for a WHO hand sanitizer. The one next to it said alcohol free, lasts 24 hours, doesn't matter how many times you wash your hands, you know, will moisturize your hands, stop cracking, all of that sort of thing. But they were both being sold there as effective hand sanitizers. So I think the TGA is really trying to get stuff out there to make it clear what is effective and what isn't, and their processes are changing to make sure that happens more quickly.
Great, thank you very much, Lynn. Okay, everyone, that brings us to the conclusion of our session today. Thank you very much for your participation and your attendance, and a special thanks to Lynn and Griffin for this wonderful presentation. What I would like to do is draw your attention to the final 2 in our series of webinars. So our next one is on the 30th of July, and that is looking at Black Swan events, which COVID certainly is globally, and looking at what it's taught us so far about crisis communications. And then later in August, we're going to take a look at positive change management during the time of COVID. So as we've all appreciated, change has been quite constant through this time. But what are the positives we can take from it and some of those learnings to be able to apply as the change indeed continues through the pandemic period? So please, we'd love to have you join us for those sessions as well. So thank you all very much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us today. We wish you a safe and happy afternoon. Goodbye.